Hello, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Mary, and today's video is going to be my second quarter bops and flops. So I mentioned this in my last bops and flops video, but I did steal this title from Kinky Sweat. She does this for beauty products, but I do it for books, obviously, because this is a book channel. So basically what I do in these videos is I tell you 5 books that I really loved, and then 4 books that I think I could take or leave. But without further ado, we're just gonna jump into it. And I like to start and end this on a positive, so I have 5 bops and 4 flops. So without further ado, my first bop is going to be The Book of M by Ping Shepherd, which I apparently will never shut up about. It is a sci-fi dystopian book set in right outside of DC, but basically the premise is this disease or something is happening and it's sweeping the nation and the world where people are losing their shadows, and then with their shadows they start to lose their memories. And this book basically follows this man and his wife who were at a wedding outside of Washington DC when this sort of hit, and they decided to stay at the hotel that their wedding was at, and this is a couple years after this has first started happening, and his wife Max has just lost her shadow, which means that she will soon start to lose her memories. And then at the very beginning of the book, he has to go back out for supplies in like a post-apocalyptic world type thing. And when he comes back to the house where he's been living, his wife is not there. So it's a book about him trying to find his wife. I'm gonna go turn off my air conditioning unit because it's really loud, so give me 1 second. So what I loved the most about this book is I loved the way that it told the story from multiple different perspectives. So we don't just get the perspective of the man whose wife is now missing, who he's trying to find, but we also get perspectives of a girl who was training for the Olympics beforehand, and I think she was from Iran, but she was in the United States training for the Olympics, and we follow where she's going, and all the storylines end up connecting, which is just really satisfying. I love when that happens. And this has one of my all-time favorite dystopian tropes, which is, I call it the long walk. I don't know what it's actually called, but it's where a group of people in a post-apocalyptic world, there's a disease that has ravaged the world, and for some reason the people who are survivors of the disease all have to migrate to one area. I love that trope. And I'm gonna talk about a book, I'll actually probably mention it next just because I'm talking about The Long Walk right now, that does it not as well, but this book I think is really good. So I would highly recommend this book for people who like dystopian like that and who like the long walk trope, and especially if you aren't the type of person who needs to have everything explained, because part of the book is that people don't really know why this is happening, and they never really find out why it's happening or what is really going on or why your memories are somehow tied up in your shadow. So I thought that was fine, but I know that bothers some people, so if that's gonna bother you, then I wouldn't recommend this. But yes, this is one of my, if not my favorite sci-fi that I've read this year, it is one of my favorite sci-fis that I've read this year. The first flop on this list is gonna be Wanderers by Chuck Wendig, which has the same trope, but I did not think it was carried out in the same way. And Wanderers actually reminds me a lot more of The Stand by Stephen King, which I did really enjoy. I read that last year, but I just don't think Wanderers was as successful in what it was trying to do. So in Wanderers, there's a group of people, and they're called the Sleepwalkers, but they are afflicted with this disease type thing wherein they sort of lose consciousness, but they're just walking. They're not asleep per se. They actually never sleep. They just walk in a certain direction, and the people who go with them are called the shepherds, and they're the shepherds of the flock. And so the main point of view that we're following is this girl, Shayna, whose sister, Nessie, was the first sleepwalker, and she's been following the herd the whole time, or the flock, or whatever it's called. We also follow perspectives from people in the CDC who are trying to figure out what's going on. And the reason I didn't like this book is, first of all, it's really long. It's 800 pages, and I did not feel like it needed to be that long, and I actually felt like Chuck Wendig wanted to make it longer to make it more like The Stand, and I just didn't think it needed to be that long, and I didn't think it did. Again, the things that The Stand did successfully, I don't feel like were done that successfully in this book. I also didn't like that we don't find out what's going on until the very end, and there's so much happening that I really wish that we'd found out earlier on what was going on, because that way I feel like it would have been more interesting to sort of decipher from there. But a lot of this book does focus on like fringe political groups, if you will. And I feel like he was trying to recreate the sort of tension that America was feeling in the wake of this 2016 election, or leading up to the 2016 election. And I just don't think it needed to be like that. Like, I don't think that needed to be something that was brought into it. I don't really know how else to explain it better, but I just really didn't like this book. I ended up giving it 2 stars. It was just overall not for me, and I do not recommend it. The next BOP that I'm going to talk about is In Ember and the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir, which I gave 5 stars to, and I was kind of shocked that I loved it as much as I did, because this is a YA fantasy, and I typically like YA fantasy, but I don't usually love them. I'm 25, so I don't read a ton of YA now. I just felt like this book was so good, and it was so interesting. The world building was so rich, but it wasn't too complicated, which is sort of what I prefer in my fantasy. It's kind of why I don't read a lot of high fantasy or high adult high fantasy. What am I trying to say?
I know a lot of things, but I don't know about that.
Just because sometimes the world building is too much for me, and I feel like I can't keep up, and the characters are too much. But this is a pretty simple plot. It's following this girl named Laya who has to go undercover as a slave in this military academy called Blackcliff, and there's a boy at Blackcliff, and his name is Elias, and he is like a legacy sort of at this school. So his grandfather was a really good, they're called masks, and they're basically the highest level of like military that you can be. I think they're kind of like, if you think about like the Navy SEALs, that's sort of like the type of thing, except for obviously it's magical, and they have these masks that fold on or morph into their skin. So what you're saying is they're not at all like the Navy SEALs. Glad we cleared that up. I just loved the way that the first book was handled. I loved the relationship between Laya and
That is not correct.
between Laya and Elias, and I really enjoyed seeing their friendship sort of blossom, even though they like really couldn't have one. But Elias does not want to be a part of this military community. He doesn't think that the Emperor and the I can't remember what they're called, but like the race that's at the top of the hierarchy is doing what's best for the entire empire. And it's just really interesting to get to hear his point of view on it, and I was really, really excited to continue in the series, which is why it's so disappointing that my next flop is going to be A Torch Against the Night by Sabaa Tahir, which is the second book in An Ember in the Ashes. I picked this one up immediately after finishing An Ember in the Ashes because I loved An Ember in the Ashes so, so much. I don't know if I mentioned it, but that was the group read for the May the Force Read With You readathon. And I just felt like it wasn't as interesting. We follow a new point of view, which was one of my least favorite characters in the first book. And I will say that character does redeem themselves as we move along. But also, I felt like all of the characters were doing just stupid things. And I wanted to see more of Laya and Elias's relationship blossom. And I wanted to see more of them together. And I feel like we really didn't get that. And this is a 4-book series, so I haven't read further on in the series, but I just was really disappointed in the second book. I don't know if other people feel that way. I just kind of felt, it felt very much like a filler book. And this series, to me, because there's one conflict that is laced through the first and second book that's wrapped up in the second book, so I feel like perhaps it could have potentially been a duology, and I kind of wish it had been. But I understand why the author did the things that she did with the characters and the layout of things, because this is a 4-book series, so she wanted to extend things. I just wish she hadn't.
That's my opinion!
My third BOP is going to be Pride and Prejudice, which is a reread for me. I read this in high school, and I remember liking it, but I didn't really have any strong feelings one way or another about it. And I am doing a Jane Austen, or I'm hosting, I guess, a Jane Austen read-along for this entire year. Every other month, we are reading one of Jane Austen's books from her catalog, and we are reading, the next one we're reading, I think, is Emma in August. So if you would like to join, I will link the announcement video down below. Pride and Prejudice is my favorite book by Jane Austen so far, by far. I just think it's immaculate. Like, the vibes are immaculate, the adaptations are stunning, which I know isn't really part of the book, but they definitely like boost my enjoyment of them because I get to see actors, especially the 2005 Pride and Prejudice. It's my, like, probably my favorite book to film adaptation of all time at this point. But I truly loved this book. I love the relationship. If you don't know what it's about Elizabeth Bennet, who is the second oldest sister in this family of 5 sisters. They live in the countryside in England, and they're trying to find husbands, basically, because the way their father's will is set up, or the way their like estate is passed down, is it has to be passed to the next male heir. So basically, all of the women are going to end up destitute unless they marry well. So that's the basic premise. And then Elizabeth Bennet at this dance, or yeah, I think they're called dances, but it's like this party thing hosted in her town or in a nearby town. She meets this man Mr. Darcy, and she thinks he's stubborn and stuck up and pretty rude, and she just doesn't really like him, but it's their love story, so obviously they fall for each other. And just like, Mr. Darcy is an iconic love interest. Like, he invented the trope of like soft but only for you, which is my favorite hero in a romance, I'm discovering. And I have another book on this list that is going to sort of explain that even further, or I guess illustrate that even further. But yes, I love Pride and Prejudice. If you have not read it yet, I think you should. And if you're just really not interested in reading classics, watch the 2005 adaptation. So good. The next flop that I'm going to talk about, I'm kind of disappointed in myself for not liking it, but it is one of my DNFs. So again, in my stats video, I mentioned that I've DNF'd 2 books. One of them is not really a flop. It's just a book that I didn't finish on time, and I'll get back to it eventually if I want to, or maybe I won't. I don't really care about it. But this DNF is Apple by Eric Gansworth, which is a memoir written in verse. And the reason I'm so upset that I didn't like this is, first of all, I usually like books written in verse, typically, especially if I can listen to them as an audiobook, and I listen to this as an audiobook. And I love memoirs. I'm a sucker for a memoir, and I just feel bad for putting someone's memoir down and saying, like, I don't really want to read this, especially because it's about Eric Gansworth's experience as a Native American, and just sort of what that has been like. Apple, if you don't know, is a slur for Native American people who are red on the outside, white on the inside. So, I thought this book was going to be so powerful, and I feel like I've heard really good things about it. It just did not work for me in the slightest, and it was the writing that didn't work for me. The writing, the problem that I had with that is that it felt like it didn't need to be in verse, and the verse didn't really make sense. It didn't really add anything to the narrative, and even listening to the audiobook, which is recorded or narrated by Eric Gansworth, who is the author, did not aid in this at all. It just made it seem even more disjointed and weird to me. So I was really not a fan of that. So unfortunately, I really didn't like that book. I'm so sorry. The next BOP that I have to talk to you about is Amari and the Night Brothers by B.B. Alston, which is the middle grade, what was I saying? One of the 3 middle grades that I've read so far this year. But it follows this young girl, Amari, who is Black, and her brother has gone missing. And at the beginning of the book, she is like, well, I need to find my brother, because people aren't taking her seriously that he's missing. People just think, oh, well, he's a Black kid from a poor part of town, so he's probably got involved in drugs and is missing in relation to that. She's like, no, he had a real job. We don't know what it was, but he was doing something. He was sending money back home. Like, something has happened to him and no one will listen to her. So she decides to go out and find him on her own. And on the way, she finds this supernatural world, basically, and this camp for people who are involved in the supernatural world in our world. And she goes there. So it's a little bit like Men in Black mixed with like a magic school, mixed with a little bit of like Percy Jackson, because she is chosen to go to this summer camp. And I absolutely loved it. So she's awesome. She gets to have like a roommate who is a were-dragon, which means that she turns into a dragon instead of a wolf. So it just was so cute, so imaginative, imaginative. I don't think I said that word correctly. It's a very just unique premise. I just absolutely loved it, and I cannot wait for the sequel. The last flop that I'm going to talk about, I think might make people upset, but I was upset, so I don't really care.
It is what it is.
And it's The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. I didn't like it. I gave it 3 stars. Genuinely, I think it's more of a 2.5 type of situation, but I just wasn't a fan. I liked Kristen Hanna's writing style for the most part, although I did find that she would forget what she had just said while writing the book, which is something that really bothered me. There was a lot of just inconsistencies in just like normal things, like the weather. She would forget how poor the characters were supposed to be. She would forget what season they were in. It didn't feel like she did her research well enough. And I feel bad saying that because I don't really know what went into this book. But also, what I think really like the core of what bothered me about it was the way in which the female characters were sort of sold to the reader as if they were supposed to be like really heroic and really great and really cool. But the biggest thing that they like repeatedly say about these characters is that they were able to get away with things because they were pretty. But they also didn't have any like badassery, in my opinion, to back it up. yeah, it was very disappointing to me because I was expecting to love it. My mom loved it. My sister loved it. I genuinely did not like it, and I don't understand the hype behind it. And people love that book, so fight me on it, I guess. Finally, my last bop is, it's probably the best book I've read so far this year. And I wish I didn't film my mid-year freakout tag, I guess, before this video, because then I wouldn't, or before I read it, because then I would not have had a hard time at all telling you what my favorite book so far this year has been. And also I think it's a big contender for my favorite book of the year. And it's my favorite contemporary / romance that I've read of all time, which is a big claim, but it's true. And it's The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. And I am always the person who says that I hate to love romance, but what I think I don't like is the bully aspect of it. Like, I don't like characters who are mean to each other. And that, in my opinion, is not really present here. They're just characters who are pitted against each other. They're competing for a job. So this follows Lucy and Josh. If you haven't read this, I feel like everyone and their mom has read this book, but I just read it this year. Actually, I read it twice. So I loved it. But it's a romance between Lucy and Josh, who are both, previously, before they met, they were each the personal assistant to someone who was in charge of a publishing company. And the publishing companies merged. And so they are now personal assistants to the same people, but they're sort of thrown together in a way. And they share an office. So their desks are facing each other. They look at each other all day long. And Lucy has decided, we get the whole story from Lucy's point of view. She hates Joshua Templeman, and she thinks he hates her too. And then it turns out they like each other. And it's their romance, and it follows from there. Joshua Templeman is another one of those Mr. Darcy types where he's just misunderstood, but like, he's a jerk and people are scared of him and people don't like him, but it's because he's one of those like, I'm soft but only for you types, and Lucy is his for you.
All right.
I absolutely love this book. Again, I read it 2 times. The first time I read it all the way through like normally, and then the second time I read it, immediately after that, I just skimmed and then read my favorite parts again. So I thought it was so sweet. I thought it was so well done. I thought the pacing was perfect. I thought the pairing was perfect. And I've noticed about myself, for me to like a romance, I have to love the love interest. If I don't love the love interest, I don't love the book. And so I love Joshua Templeman. So this one I thought was perfect. If you haven't checked it out, you should. So many people love this book. And I totally understand why. I think it's totally worth the hype. But there you have it. Those are my bops and flops for the second quarter of the year. I can't believe we're already halfway through the year. I'm already halfway through July, so that's insane. But yes, thank you so much for watching this video and hanging out with me for a little bit today. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give it a thumbs up. If you would like to, you can go ahead and subscribe to my channel because I do post 2 videos every single week. Make sure to let me know in the comments down below if you've read any of these books and how you felt about them. Also, let me know a bop and a flop from the last quarter for you. I would love to hear it. And I will see you in my next video.